Hey, everybody, welcome to a brand new episode of EIS Live. As always, in the beginning, I'm going to let you in on some of what EIS is about because some of you don't know who we are and some of you do. And we just want to let you know who we are and how you can tap into what we have to offer as well. So EIS, or Emotional Intelligence Solutions, is basically a counseling, coaching, and mentoring entity that really helps people to find the freedom to become all they're intended to be and discover their why and their purpose. It's not just, going for the classic idea of going for counseling because something's wrong and we need to fix it, but it's really about becoming who we genuinely are. So how do we do that? We do that by employing a process that really gives people an opportunity to go far enough into their broken past, unhealed issues from the past or traumas that basically prevent them, all of us really, from discovering healthy patterns in life as individuals and relationships, marriage, business, workplace settings, and so on, and help to deal with the whole person and not just fix those certain areas that we might see that are problematic, because they're usually symptoms of deeper root issues anyway. So then we extend the process into a leadership development kind of a direction, as we believe leadership really starts from within. So if we're not dealing with these issues within ourselves first, it's going to be hard to work in the workplace and excel, work in leadership capacities and so on, because we're going to have these broken areas keep holding us back. And also, it's not just about being a great problem solver or having a great skill set as a leader. It's really having a desire to raise other people up. That's what leadership is really all about. Developing character, integrity, accountability, things like that, and other hallmarks of genuine leadership. So it's really a comprehensive approach to personal growth and maturity for the individual, from anybody who decides they want to do that, to CEOs and businesses and really everybody in between. So throughout the broadcast today, you're going to see some things popping up, and we're going to give you those opportunities on how to connect with us if you desire to do so. Another element of who EIS is and what we're doing are these live shows right here to really feature testimonies of people who have been transformed in many ways and still on their journeys, of course. Other professionals in the field of helping people in similar ways. EIS staff counselors, whom we have one on with us today, of course. Authors of books that we believe that are important resources that support our work here at EIS. And then finally, before we get started today, I want to remind you that you can post your questions at any time throughout our time here so that you can get those questions answered. We usually tap into those the last 15 or 10 minutes of the broadcast. So with that, I am going to let my co-host for today in, Christy Ann. She's our newest addition to the EIS staff. Hey.
Hey, everyone. How are you, Bill?
I'm real good. How are you doing?
Doing well. So happy to be on board with all you guys at EIS. I've been on this counseling journey with Bill. I started at the end of 2017 with my husband, Mark. Mark was with Bill a whole year before I met Mark. Mm-hmm. And we've been on this journey from dating to marriage, premarital counseling, till marriage, till now having a 10-month-old baby. So we've really just leveraged EIS, and it's been with us literally our entire lives that we've been together. And it's been one of the most biggest blessings, because life is always changing, and you need to make sure that you have those tools and you're equipped for all the changes that are going to happen. And leveraging EIS and really tapping into it faithfully, because we were going once a month for like years faithfully, really allowed us all the tools to go through all these seasons of our lives together. And even now with the baby, relearning communication skills. It's just been really just such a wonderful asset and the best thing that's ever been in our lives.
Yeah, you guys have really been exemplary in that way, like we talked about yesterday a little bit. It's such a great example of, what I kind of introed. It's not about fixing things. It's really about becoming. Mm-hmm. And, peeling back the layers in our lives and everybody's got them, of the stuff of our growing up experiences, the brokenness. I mean, I remember you and I getting together, when we started, because I was working with, like you said, I worked with Mark as a single before he even knew you.
Yeah.
And you came along, and then, I think Mark kind of pried you in and got you to.
He did. I came in very blindly. And me being phlegmatic, I'm not about a lot of questions. I'm like, no. So I didn't ask a lot of questions. So I kind of just got thrown in. And all of a sudden I had this man on the other side of the computer, you, Bill, telling me about myself. And I'm like, how do they know me so well? This is creepy. And it was just this whole new world of being able to know myself better and being able to help all the relationships in my life.
And I remember one of the, like you just mentioned, you're phlegmatic. So I remember one of the kind of the hallmark areas that you struggled with was really going into conflict and going into discussions and, areas where there might have been disagreements where you would just rather tend to smooth it over and just kind of roll with it and go like, oh, well, it's no big deal. It'll go away. But, really laying a hold of that and bringing change in that area was huge for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember just like the littlest things, that me not wanting to talk to Mark about it and having my sessions with you and you encouraging me, Christian, you need to be open about this and communicate it right when you feel it. Don't hide it. Don't suppress it. And I kept wanting to suppress. And you really helped me be able to not lead into that part of my natural temperament, so my natural tendencies, and learn how to overcome it and, take my thoughts captive and be like, nope, I'm doing this for the best of our relationship. And that was so beneficial for us. And even when I was pregnant and all those hormonal changes, like being able to lean into you during that season was just so vital for me.
I remember those changes. And look at this, like now you're here with us.
Yeah, now I get to be on the other side, and it's another blessing. So happy to be part of EIS and the team and get to know everybody better.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thanks for jumping in at the last minute, because I know this was like, hey, can you do this thing, on Monday? So thanks for doing it for us.
Of course. I'm so honored.
All right. Well, let's get on to really, you're like a guest today too. So our second guest, Kiele, is one of our original counselors, actually, since EIS began. She'll be talking about how she got connected with EIS, as well as lots of other things today. But just to give you a little background on Kiele, she completed her bachelor's in psychology at St. John's, then went on to Alliance Graduate School for counseling in the mental health field. While in graduate school, she took a life coaching course and loved it so much she went on to receive her life coaching certifications from IPEC. She received her APS certification working with us when she came on to join EIS. And if that wasn't enough, she's also a pastor and an evangelist with V1 Church Global, and really working globally, all over the world with different pastors and leaders and different ministry settings. So she's going to be sharing a little bit about that as well. And then when in her spare time, what spare time is, that's like spare money. There's just loads of that laying around. She rides her bike at the beach, works out, seeks adventure because she's a sanguine, of course, in most forms, and loves entertaining, which you're going to see today. So welcome, Kiele Hauser.
Hi. I'm so happy to be here today.
Yay!
I'm going to bring all the sanguine for you guys.
Thank you so much. We really needed us phlegos and melancholy. So
I call it fleggy. Whenever my friends are being like that, I'm like, are you being a little fleggy right now?
I love that. I call it flego, but I may have to change it to fleggy.
I like it. Either way, I love it. So,
yeah, phlegomatic.
So happy to be here. This is very exciting. Really wanting to sit down on your piano.
Well, yeah, like I told you before, I moved from the studio over to the living room today. It's a little brighter in here, so one day I'm going to pull the screen down, and I'll be found out. Actually, my little office here is actually pretty cute. I don't even know why. So what can I say?
I like it.
So anyway, thanks for coming on. It's a long time coming.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I really love having you in any capacity, having an interview or whatever, because you are so sanguine and you just bring a ton of energy and a lot of charisma to your message and what you have to bring to the table, which we just read through just quite a bit that you bring to the table. So just to, like I started everybody off a little bit, as I mentioned yesterday, I really like to get people to know guests a little bit before we start getting into some topics. And I do want to bait people a little bit because like we mentioned yesterday again, I want to talk about some topics that most people struggle with on one capacity or another, like codependency, trauma bonding, finding our identity, our thought life, and more. We definitely want to get into that stuff, but tell us a little bit about you, how you don't have to give us all of your childhood background and everything else, of course, but how did you kind of navigate, through the school years, college years, and getting a heart to help people?
Yeah. Well, I had a messed up life, so
Qualified.
my own journey to get healthy. And, I guess on some level, I've always been a little bit of an evangelist in that I've always kind of, whatever was working for me, I wanted to share it with other people. And as I started just ministering to my friends and talking to my friends about things. Oh, hi, Jocelyn. Jocelyn's one of our other counselors. She's on with us. So I realized this is something that I'm gifted in. This is something the Lord's given me like a gift in, like just the ability to see down to the root and not just what's going on the surface. And so I started pursuing it. And honestly, temperament counseling has been kind of a culmination of everything that I've studied, but then really like none of it really clicked completely until that temperament piece was put in place, and then it all kind of made sense, so training from all different places and all different methods kind of all came together when we were able to add the temperament piece to it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And it's helped me a lot too. It's interesting because when I first learned about temperaments, or my temperament, I wasn't surprised by anything I read. I was like, oh yeah, I knew that about myself already. Oh yeah. But it was very validating for me to see it written down, because some of the things that, and this might be true for a lot of people watching, but some of the things that are true about as a sanguine are things that got really invalidated in me as a child. So my emotions, my need to be around people, both my parents are melancholy. And so I needed to be around my friends all the time. And my parents were like, there's something wrong with you. Why do you always need to be with people? Like there's something really wrong. And I'm going, no, I just really need my friends, So a lot of that stuff was really validating for me.
Yeah. And that's interesting too, because you have melancholy parents as a sanguine. And so, and I know this must have played into your growing up experience in probably more than one way, is when we know temperament, of course, his needs are not being met, is usually the catalyst for problems in our lives. And so we're always seeking to get our inborn needs met. And those needs are very different as a melancholy. And the melancholies don't need inclusion. They don't want to be hanging out with people. They're not necessarily expressive. They like their own space. They probably don't give a lot of affection and love and hugs and things like that. And you're looking for all of that, right?
Totally. Mm-hmm. Totally. I remember realizing when I was going through my temperament that I guess it had never occurred to me that I didn't feel very loved by my parents when I was growing up, because they didn't touch me a lot. And it wasn't until I realized that I was a sanguine compulsive in affection that I realized why that was. And it actually gave me a chance to be able to forgive them and realize that that's just not the way that they expressed their love. My mom is actually sanguine compulsive in affection also. So I'm not sure why she didn't touch me more, but she's melancholy phlegmatic in the other two areas. And so she was kind of like, lots of reserving her energy, lots of like seeing things very black and white, and I don't see things black and white. So, you know, it just helped me a lot say, oh, wow, this is why I'm so different from my parents.
Yeah, it's so huge to understand that. And, you know, I remember when you first came on and, you know, we started putting you through the course for, you know, to do the APS. And you did it so fast, faster than anybody I've ever known in my entire life. I think it was like 6 weeks or something.
No, it was 17 days.
17 days. And then we did supervision, and you were just like spot on, man. I mean, you just picked that up. And like you said, it was like the book is called The Missing Link, right?
Yeah.
And it really ties all these things together of understanding these things. It's so huge, especially as we kind of move into the topics in a few minutes, like I mentioned earlier, because so much of those upbringing experiences and that trauma that we experienced, the temperament element is there. You know, how we processed all of those things, in what way, what kind of support did we or didn't we have from parents or siblings or other people in our lives and all of that. Did we have to, that's where a lot of parental inversion comes in, for example. We're going through things alone. We have to be the adult in certain situations, stuff like that, that really just throws a monkey wrench in the machinery of growing up. And then, you know, as I started with the intro of like, everybody's messed up one way or another, right? So it's not a disqualification if we understand that. That's just a part of the growing up experience, but we have to allow it to become our qualification, essentially, right? So
yeah,
the way to do that is to get into a process that really peels back these layers and uncovers all of these different areas, so you can see how the puzzle really fits together. And there's not something necessarily wrong with me, although other things like depression and things can evolve out of these type of dysfunctional situations. But you and I talked last night about how many people are misdiagnosed with bipolar that are actually sanguine compulsives.
Totally. And ADHD. And, you know, I think I was telling you before that, like, when I'm in my dependent mode for whatever reason, like, it's very easy for me to isolate. And I don't think a lot of people know that about sanguines, right? Because they think sanguines are people. So they assume that sanguines just want to be with people all the time, but there is that sanguine swing. And when sanguines go into dependent mode, they often will isolate. They will like not hold themselves accountable to the people they're accountable to. And so I've noticed, for me, I actually had a conversation with my pastor today, and I told her, hey, if you notice me isolating, I need you to call me out on it, because sometimes I don't even notice I'm doing it until I'm like way into it. And so I have that kind of accountability for myself because I know my temperament. But if I didn't know my temperament, I wouldn't be able to have those, right? Like, I plan adventure in my life. I've talked about this a million times. I plan fun things in my life, and nothing can stand in the way of me doing those things, because if I don't, I'm not good for all the rest of the things I have to do. And everyone has needs like that. They might not be as great as going on adventures, but but they're there, you know?
Well, especially with a blended temperament, like if you have melancholy and control, for example, you know, that's, I always call that the control panel of the person, like pulling all the levers, you know? So that's really huge. And depending on the person, you know, the rest of their temperament is going to play into that, and it's going to be affected by that one way or the other. So I think the sanguine is probably the best temperament definition of both and.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, they really are both and. They're dependent, independent, dependent, independent. And then if you blend a temperament like an independent melancholy in there, or even a phlegmatic, and maybe Christiane can chime in, like that phlegmatic who's reserving their energy and guarding their energy level, that's definitely going to affect on both sides of that sanguine scale. So now we're in a full-on temperament discussion. So go ahead, Christiane, and chime in on that, and then maybe we can move into some other topics.
Of course. Kiele, I couldn't agree with you more with that sanguine swing. I am married to a sanguine compulsive defection, and I'm straight phlegmatic in defection. So I am like even keel, super easygoing, but my husband's blended in the other two areas. So sanguine melancholy and inclusion, and then phlegmatic, sanguine, and control. So we've experienced those sanguine swings that you guys are talking about, and I like didn't know what they were, and we would be sitting in sessions with Bill, and he'd be like, "Oh, that's sanguine swing," and I was like, "Sanguine swing," and then once Bill explained it all, it made so much sense to both of us, and really helping us navigate communication issues.
Yeah, it's for really real. I think managing that, learning how to manage the sanguine swing is probably the single most important feat of a sanguine.
Yeah, 1,000%. And that's a great segue into maybe some other dovetailing topics, because for sanguines particularly, and I'm not going to make this all about sanguines, but since you are a sanguine, we'll talk about you, I guess. But I've worked with a lot of sanguines in counseling and discipleship and internships over the many years of doing this stuff, and this is the appendage I add on to taking your thoughts captive for the sanguine. It's taking your thoughts, feelings, and emotions captive.
Yeah.
Because the sanguines are so in touch with their feelings and emotions, they have to understand that they're not exempt.
Right.
Because like just for example, one sanguine that I've known for probably 20 years at this point, she was one of our staff people at New York City Relief. She would always say things like, well, it just happened. Or I just feel that way. I can't do anything about that. I just feel that way. And so they view their, not everybody, of course, but they can view their feelings and their emotions as something other than who they really are or even responsible for.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, yeah.
So taking those captive is so huge. And I always say things like, feelings they're like thoughts that are ganged up.
That's good, Bill.
I
like that.
They're all ganged up and they're clawing and talking out loud, and creating this fray, and flurry of activity in the mind. And that's one of the reasons why it can't, it's hard to shut it off. And then if they have melancholy in there, like you do, you got the melancholy thing that's not shutting off anyway, and that motor's running. And then it's like high octane in the tank, with the sanguine going in there. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, totally. So something that I've been learning a lot, and I think this is true for everyone. Oh, there's so many people on that I love. Hi, everyone. Oh, Pastor Mike Signorelli's on.
Yeah, from JFK, no less.
Sandy from JFK. Sandy, Dariana's on. Hi, guys. So something that I've been learning a lot more. I probably have known it on some level for a while, but you know how sometimes certain things in your life are like kind of highlighted. And what this particular thing that's been highlighted lately is taking your thoughts and your feelings captive isn't about shutting them down.
Mm-hmm.
It's about allowing them to have the space for you to experience them without them taking over. So if I feel angry, I'm not going to go, stop feeling angry. You can't feel angry. I go, okay, I'm feeling really angry right now. I wonder why I'm feeling so angry. I wonder what's being triggered right now. I wonder what I need right now. Right. And so it gives me an opportunity to actually explore and be in my feelings and allow myself to feel them and really feel them without shaming myself for them, but also without them becoming my boss, right? We don't want our feelings to ever become our boss. And so I think like that's the thoughts captive thing is a little different because some of the thoughts we really don't want to entertain, but the feelings we need to explore them, but in a safe and healthy way. Does that make sense?
1,000,000%. I mean, that's a misnomer of taking your thoughts captive is like, oh, don't think about that or shut it down. It's always perceived in the negative, but it's really about discerning, right? Mm-hmm. It's really about discerning my thoughts. Like, what are they telling me? And do I want to listen to them? Are they lining up with my heart where basically where God is trying to take us in the direction in our lives, and so on, and in our journey, or is it contrary to that?
Yeah.
you know, and we all work with a lot of people, right? And how many times I've had a nickel for every time somebody said, well, I knew it when it was happening, but, you know, I just didn't choose it.
Right.
So I'm going to segue into these other elements that we mentioned.
Yeah.
Pick up on any one of them you want, but that's where the trauma comes in. That's where the trauma bonding comes in, for example. That's where the childhood scripts come in. And I'll encapsulate this because this is the problem that a lot of people deal with. And there was a guy in New York City Relief promo video years and years ago that said this. In his giving his testimony, he said people would ask me, because he was homeless for years on the streets of New York City, and people would ask him, is like, well, why don't you go get help? You know, why don't you go into a program, get off drugs, you know, do these things? And this was his answer, and I never forgot it, and I use it all the time because it's so true. Because I didn't think I could make it, I never chose it.
Wow.
And so many people in counseling and coaching and the stuff that we do, they don't choose it because they've disqualified themselves and they don't think they can make it. And therein comes the stuff from the past. And all these elements that we talk so much about, like codependency, parental inversion, the trauma bonding issue, which is huge, and the loss of identity through all that. Of course, our thought life, depression, and all the other stuff starts coming on the train with it, of course.
Yeah.
Addictions, weigh out problems that are temperament related even. You know what I mean? That, you know, like, for example, a melancholy be prone to depression, for example. So we, you know, have a layer of that on top. And then, you know, and every other temperament might have its propensities too. So anyway, I could go on forever, but I'm going to throw that at you. Why don't you pick up on maybe if you feel like this is where you want to go, the trauma bonding issue.
Yeah.
Because it has so much to do with our identity.
Yeah. So I think, well, first of all, we have to start with trauma, right? So trauma is not one event it's not necessarily one event that changes everything. Trauma is tiny little neglect and tiny little emotional abandonment and tiny little rejections. And all these things add up to tell us a story, a false story of who we are. And that creates trauma. So if our whole, you know, for me as an example, both of my parents told me my emotions were too much. And so as a result of that constant trauma in my life, I became high performance, high productivity. I shut my emotions down, except for anger. I felt anger often. And I became like a robot. I have to be perfect. I have to have it all together. I was the most high achieving. I was the most, you know, successful. I got the most recognition because that got me the attention I wanted, but my feelings never did. And so I shut them down. And that trauma actually created, for me, I recognized that I started to be drawn to people in friendships and even in romantic relationships that were with people that were emotionally unavailable. And it's because I was told that emotions weren't okay. And because my parents were on some level emotionally unavailable to me. And so that trauma created in me a familiarity to people who are emotionally unavailable. And so I found myself like unhealthily drawn to friendships and relationships like that. And any kind of trauma we have. So if our trauma is rejection, then we're going to be unhealthily drawn to people who reject us. Now, that sounds ridiculous on the surface, because who the heck would want to be drawn to somebody that's going to reject them? But we don't mean it. It's like a neurological reaction that we have to the familiar release of hormones when we're around people that remind us of our childhood. And almost everybody is trauma bonding with someone, or at least that's how it starts, right?
Right.
I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that being in a trauma bonded relationship means that we're doomed to fail, right? We can all do work. There's always a solution. There's always healing that can be done. But sometimes those trauma bonds are so toxic and so dangerous that your only option is to run in the other direction.
Well, and that's where the soul tie issue really comes into play as well, when it is so deep. I have several people that I work with that right now are working so hard to get out of this.
Mm-hmm.
They this is what I was saying before, like they don't choose, they know it, but they don't choose it because like you said, the familiarity of, and that's weird too. It's like the most uncomfortable place in the universe for me is in that trauma place, right? But why is it so comfortable for me to gravitate to that place? It's because it is familiar. It's the only thing that I really know. I can relate it into when I, decided to stop drinking. It was terrorizing to me to think of not drinking, because I had done it from the age of 15 to 30, and it was the only thing that I knew. So engaging in society on any level at all, let alone relationships, because I didn't have relationships. I just took hostages. I was a master hostage taker because of my trauma and my broken background. But it was terrorizing to me to think, like, how am I going to make it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I also think, like, when you were talking a little bit about identity, so oftentimes I'll hear clients who come in and say, well, I just don't know if I believe that there's anybody else better out there for me, or I don't know that I believe that I deserve to be treated better.
Mm-hmm.
And those belief systems are a result of trauma. And so we accept in relationships, in friendships, in jobs, in salaries, what we believe we deserve, right? And we recreate it. In psychology, they call that the self-fulfilling prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
You create what you believe. And I think it's also biblical, right? You reap what you sow.
Well, as a man believes in his heart, so he is as well, and totally. I mean, I used to think I was an idiot, and I just acted like an idiot. I was dysfunctional in social settings. I was a recluse, and I needed my anesthesia to be able to, at least I thought I did, to function. I needed to have some drinks in me.
Yeah, a recluse. Talk about melancholy all the way through.
Hey, I was good at it. I was a professional at it back then.
Oh, that's funny. When you say recluse, I think of like Howard Hughes with the really long nails sticking under the door. And did you see that movie? No.
No, but I know what you're talking about.
So yeah. So
I don't look quite like that either, by the way.
So trauma really does shape everything that how we see ourselves, how we interact with other people. And until we deal with that trauma, we are like always going to repeat those habits, those patterns. And that's really why, for me, that's why I went to counseling. Because I looked around at my family and I said, this is a poopy show. And I don't want it to be like this in my life. So I have to do something different. And it's interesting because still to this day, my family doesn't really believe in counseling. I mean, my sister said to me the other day, we were having a little tiff and I was like, just stop feeling so guilty and just be honest and set boundaries. And she's like, don't therapize me. I don't believe in your therapy crap. And I'm like, okay. And so, like, obviously I'm a little bit of an outcast in my family and I've always had to live. I've come to accept it now, but as a child, it was very traumatic for me. So learning that that's okay and learning how to celebrate myself, learning how to really be comfortable in my own skin helped me grow out of my own trauma. And so as I lead other people through that process, it becomes like, do you believe that you were created for a reason? Do you believe that God makes mistakes? Because I don't believe God makes mistakes. So when he made me sanguine, he did that on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I remember having a prayer time with him where I really felt very strongly that he was saying to me, your emotions are my favorite thing about you. Mm. I love that about you. That's how I made you. And it was like all that trauma just lifted in that moment.
Mm-hmm. That's really good. That's really, really good. Because I see the comment from Zoraida there I put up a second ago. I don't believe I deserve to be treated better. It's because of our identity, right? It's how we perceive ourselves to be. And it's the value. It's the valuation that we put on ourselves, and it's been dictated to by other people. many times in our lives, and then ultimately ourselves, because we believe that about ourselves. So then the trauma bond comes in, and that's where the soul tie gets created. Let's just focus on that a minute, because, you know, when you get two people that are broken, contrary to popular belief, you know, we give out the articles on My Marriage Wasn't Meant to Be from Matt Walsh, for example, you know, thinking that we're just going to find that other half of us floating around the universe somehow magically. And, you know, we're just going to complete each other and everything's going to be wonderful. We're going to live happily ever after, you know, and then we get married and everything turns to crap. Like, why? Well, like Mike Todd says, you know, you can't hook onto somebody else and expect them to make up for your stupid stuff.
Right.
You got two people and their stupid stuff that have now come together that is doubly destructive. And everybody has a goofy notion, you know, that, well, this person is going to fix me, basically, and they're going to help me to go through my stuff, and I'm going to get better. And they both have this, you know, this way out notion that just isn't on planet Earth anywhere. You know what I mean? So what happens is now, but, you know, of course, many times people have gotten together, they're building their sexual relationship and they're doing all that stuff before they're married, and they're becoming intimate, at least physically, but they have no idea how to become intimate emotionally or spiritually. And then they go ahead and get married that way. And that's how that soul tie gets formed and shaped. That's what it really is. And they're interconnected, or enmeshed is the big word that's really used out there for them. They're enmeshed emotionally. And when that goes on for years and years and years, and again, I have several people right now that I'm sure you do too, that we're working with, that it's been 12, 13, 14 years in this type of situation.
Yeah.
And to break that, it's like I've used this analogy, like, you know what a window screen looks like, right? If you melt two of them together and try to pull them apart.
Right.
That's what enmeshed looks like. And then we get them.
Well, I always think of enmeshed. I don't know why, but I've always thought of it like a spider web. Like, you can't piece apart a spider web. Do you see Mark's comment, by the way?
I'll just put that up, yeah.
That's Christiane's husband, everyone.
And now I'm blushing.
But that's sweet. It's cute. I think, you know, enmeshment is like this web that gets tied together and there's no way to pull it apart. And so, you know, my favorite definition of codependency is I'm not okay when you're not okay. So as long as you're not okay, I am caught in your web. I'm like webbed in there. I can't tell where my responsibility ends and yours begins. And so enmeshment is like, oh my gosh, this person's not okay. So now I have to figure out how to make them okay, or else I'm going to lose my freaking mind, right? And that is the essential definition of what happens. You know, in trauma bonding, there is always codependency and counterdependency. And the trauma bond is really, I like how you said it was like, how do you pull those melted things apart? It's an addiction. So most people come to me and say, no, I know this is my soulmate. I've never loved anyone like this. And the sex is amazing. And I'm like, yeah, you just described a trauma bond. That's not love. That's brokenness. And it's flaring up between you. It's like a fire that got started between you. And then it's like, okay, well, I have to make sure that I'm always there for this person's every need, because if I'm not, then I'm going to lose this insane, crazy love that I think is so amazing. But on some level, it just becomes like a whirlwind and you just get stuck in it and you can't get out. And the only way to break trauma bonding is two ways, is if both people are willing to do the work and get healthy and start pulling that web apart, or you have to block them out of your life completely and run in the other direction, which is more often than not the case, because trauma bonding can become very dangerous and toxic and abusive.
Very much so. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, again, I'm working with people. You can't tell people what to do, you know, but you have to lead them down a road where they see that whatever the need is for them, that they take those steps and make those choices. Because once again, you know, if I don't think I'm worth it, I won't choose it. If I don't think I can make it, I won't choose it. If I think I'm going to fail, I might not choose it, depending on temperament and so on, you know. So Christiane, I know you've been patiently waiting back there just to dive right in. So anything you want to throw into the pot here?
Everything Kiele said was so spot on. Prior to meeting with you, Bill, and before meeting Mark, I had soul ties that I didn't even know. And I'm Christian. So when I laid all that down at the altar and really left it up to God, that is when I was able to meet Mark, my husband, and enter a healthy relationship, doing it correctly, practicing abstinence, and really going on the healthy, proper relationship journey. And having EI solutions in there throughout this whole time has really, helped us, because I had inverted parenting in there as well. So you throw that layer, there's a whole nother spiel. But doing the work to break those is what really helps you in the long term.
Yeah, that's right. It's hard work though, right?
Oh yeah, it still is too. When you think you're like doing great, something comes right on up. Another like weed pops on up.
Well, I'm sure Bill could relate to this, but I'm 15 or 16 years into my journey, and that still happens all the time. Not thankfully as often or as intense as before, but I think we have to kill this belief system that there's like something to arrive at, right? Like that we're somehow okay, so this is a good example. All of the pastors that have been caught cheating on their wives or stealing money or all this stuff in the recent past, right? All of that is a reflection of the fact that they somehow believed that they had gotten to a point where they didn't need help or accountability anymore, where they didn't need counseling, where they didn't need mentorship or leadership in their lives. And I think there's this common misconception that people are going to go through, a few counseling sessions. And I have people say to me all the time, how long do you think this is going to take?
Mm-hmm.
Your whole life. So strap in. It never stops.
Again, I think that goes way back to that entire lie that, of counseling in the first place, is you go to counseling and you get things fixed, and it spills over into the whole medication issue of, it's just so easy to think that if I'm depressed, I go to a doctor, I get a pill and I'm not depressed anymore. I feel better. Take a feel better pill, just fix everything fast, take a pill, keep moving on, just keep moving.
Right.
I don't have time for this. I remember working in the streets of New York City all those years, right? And people would come and, be not everybody, but some people would be getting into some deep conversations, and, about their lives and the possibility of maybe getting into a program or something and maybe getting some change happening or whatever, And then when they started to get uneasy, now these are mostly homeless people that aren't doing anything. They'd be going like, is this going to take a long, I got some stuff I got to get going. Where are you going? Where are you headed, man? And it's the same thing. It's like, as soon as it gets uneasy or uncomfortable or the work gets to be too much, it's like, we just don't want to do it. Isn't there an easier, softer way? And that's when you talk about addictions, like all this is really addiction, to these trauma bonds and the things that we're talking about here. It is an addiction, and so, half measures will never get you anything. Like, you have to treat it like it is.
Yeah.
If you do a half measure and it's like, well, what do I got to do? I got to read a book, and then forget about it when you're telling people they have to sit down and start reading together as a couple, for example, like to develop and cultivate emotional intimacy. That's like, I don't want to do. That's weird.
Right. Totally.
These things are foreign to people, it's like, but we're throwing them in there. It's like, you're not going to like what I'm about to say, but you need to do this if you really want to get somewhere different than where you are. If you want to stay the way you are, then don't do anything different.
Mm-hmm.
Keep doing the same things and kind of hope for the best. And that's where we start coping and hoping, right? And employing our survival techniques that we've employed ever since we were kids.
Right.
Just to get by, and here we come with these like these big bombs of like, no, you need to do this, you need to do this. But you're right. It's not like we're just going to fix all of that. And then, in 6 months or something, you're going to be done and then just move on from there,
Totally. I mean, I think a lot of people don't realize that codependency is a trauma response.
Mm-hmm.
So codependency, for me, codependency protected me as a child. It kept me safe, but it didn't once I became an adult. I didn't need it anymore. Now, did it keep me safe? Yes. Was it dysfunctional? Super duper yes. But it's, these things that we do, detachment, disassociation, the things that really damage our romantic relationships, our marriages when we're adults, those are things that we learn as defense mechanisms as children. So they're not like, we're not being jerks when we employ these techniques. We are subconsciously or unconsciously trying to protect ourselves from pain, because our brains are not, our subconscious mind isn't smart enough to discern whether our defense mechanisms that it's employing is actually going to be good for us long term. It just sees danger, I need to protect you.
Mm-hmm.
And so it does whatever it can do to protect you. And so all of these things, and that's the harder part of the journey, is that a lot of people really struggle to show themselves compassion and grace in the areas where they're the weakest, because they think, oh, something's wrong with me, I'm broken, instead of going, oh my gosh, subconscious brain, thank you so much for trying to protect me. You don't need to protect me anymore, but I appreciate all the hard work you've been doing, right? Like, I actually will say that to my brain when I see a coping mechanism pop up. Thank you so much. I know you're trying to protect me. I actually don't need you. And I know that sounds weird to talk to my coping mechanisms, but it's my only way of saying, I'm not gonna interact with this. I'm choosing not to interact with this, let's say, detachment or coping mechanism or whatever, codependency. I'm choosing to be present with it in the moment. But Bill and I were talking before, and I said, the way I like to describe it is keeping your butt and your head in the same place, right? When we go into coping mechanisms, we detach, we go into, future thinking and fantasy, or codependency, and codependency is really focusing on someone else's life so you don't have to focus on your own, or focusing on someone else's problems so you don't have to focus on your own. So those are all coping mechanisms. And we have to understand that coping mechanisms aren't our enemy if we're going to get healthy.
Well, employing them when they are beneficial, knowing when they're not there to avoid things, for example, and things of that nature, that's what we're talking about. Like we mentioned the word discernment earlier. And if you're not getting into a process of understanding your mechanisms and all the stuff that we're talking about, you don't know what's what, and you're just kind of running rampant with your coping mechanisms and survival techniques, for example. And they're all going to be dysfunctional because that's the only thing you've known how to do.
Right.
But employing these things, like you said, codependency, my mother was an alcoholic and my dad didn't know how to deal with it. So I was totally codependent, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So it protected me too, to a degree. But I was a melancholy compulsive across the board, so I internalized everything too.
Mm-hmm.
Yes and no. It's always yes and no, yes and no. But the thing is, and then if you got parental inversion, you have other elements that are playing into that, which I had too, because I'm taking care of my mom, kind of a thing. You really lose discernment. Besides that, you're a kid at that stage. Adults don't even have the wherewithal and the discernment to understand, like, oh, I can employ that and that will do this.
Right.
Knee-jerk reactions to what's going on around me, And so if we can't, and that's where that term self-awareness that we use so often comes in. That's where temperament comes into the picture, because if you don't know, for example, your temperament propensities, like, why do I have these reactions in these types of situations? Why is that my go-to? Right. And is it helping me or is that hurting me? Things like that. So the whole process, when people get into the process, it gives them that opportunity to start seeing everything that we're talking about, and kind of from a 30,000 foot view, like pulling back away from that enmeshment a little bit.
Yeah.
Back away from having to employ techniques just to survive another day,
mm-hmm.
kind of a thing. Then you can really start to get somewhere, because then you can utilize the things, just kind of like what you said too. It's like God gave you your temperament, right? Like everything is there for us, but that doesn't mean that we're going to use it the way that it was intended.
Totally. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know? So at this point, we got like 10 minutes left. I want to ask people to put up their questions right now. Go ahead and do that. And I always say, like, then if you don't, then we just have to keep asking questions ourselves. So don't make us do that.
There's so many powerful people in the comments right now. I'm not going to name you all, but I see you and I'm reading your comments. So I also want to say, like, for me, I like to call myself a recovering codependent, because I learned a long time ago that it is a ridiculous statement to say, I used to be codependent. I can't even say it.
Me too.
I used to be codependent, but I'm not anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I think for a long stretch of time that felt true until, I jumped into like a big patch of trauma, like stuff happened in my life. It was very traumatic. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I jumped right back into all of those old habits, like all those old coping mechanisms immediately. And so it keeps you humble to realize that you really never do grow out of it. You really never do. I mean, you can get healthier and have the skills to handle it differently and know how to set boundaries. I mean, I must say boundaries so many times a day. I actually have a friend that every time I says it, she's like, oh God, you and your boundaries.
Well, boundaries and trauma triggers are key words in that element, because trauma triggering, I'm actually going to do a series called The Trauma Triggered Life. And I see it in myself too. Like you said, I see it from all the way back. And yes, we've grown. Yes, we don't do the same things that we did back then and all that. But we certainly see its prevalence in our lives. We can see it's rearing its ugly head to show up anytime it wants to. Yes, we've become adept at taking our thoughts, feelings, and emotions captive most of the time. But some of the times the trauma trigger gets pulled, and all of a sudden you see yourself like going into that response. You mentioned things like dissociation and all the other things that, these are our choices, and they are choices because we're choosing ways not to deal with these things for a million different reasons. So, but yes, that happens continuously. So the answer is not like we're going to be, what does freedom mean then? Freedom means I believe, being torn loose from the tyranny of these things.
Yeah.
A regular basis that destroys our lives. In other words, we have the upper hand, we have the tools, and we're every day employing them more and more until it actually starts to become rote. It starts to become the natural way of living. We employ it more and more and more regularly. I have a question that came up. So,
any advice for someone who gets angry a lot? Whoa, that's a powerful temperament. Actually, I know a couple of people that have that temperament that are like crazy world changers. So good for you. Do you want to jump at this, Bill, or do you want me to jump at it?
Oh, you can jump on it.
Well, I would say that although all three temperaments have a tendency to have some different display of anger, the anger comes from somewhere. So the temperament doesn't equal anger. The temperament equals the propensity toward anger. So you have to ask yourself, where is the anger coming from? And if you're angry a lot, then chances are you have some roots of bitterness and resentment, or some unresolved, like unforgiveness, that comes up and gets triggered a lot. So what we're often talking about when we display anger is trauma triggers, like you were talking about, Bill. Mm-hmm. So it's a trauma trigger. It's a lot of T's. Your trauma is getting triggered, and you're just feeling the feeling in the moment and not actually identifying where the feeling's coming from. So going back to something that we were talking about way in the beginning, really accessing, like, where is that feeling coming from? Why am I experiencing anger? Or what is that anger connected to? Like for me, when I experience anger, I usually know that it's attached to a childhood wound. because I don't naturally get angry that often. But I do get angry when I'm being triggered. So I'll ask myself, what's being triggered right now? And where did that come from? And then this is kind of a little bit of work that you probably would have to dig a little bit further with your counselor. But what is that trigger? What lie is that trigger attached to? Right? Like the trigger creates a lie that we believe about ourselves. I'm not enough. I'm not whatever enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not good enough. Or I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy of love. I'm not worthy of attention. People don't pay attention to me because I don't deserve it. Right. And so we have to figure out, when I'm angry, what is that attached to?
I like putting visuals on things, and I used to say it this way. It's like, when people say, stop pushing my buttons, well, if you have buttons that are active, it's up to you to figure out where are the wires that are connected to the back of the buttons connected to, very much what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
So what you want to do is disconnect the wires from the back of the buttons, not demand that people don't press your buttons.
Totally. I love that.
Yeah, because the world is going to continue to press your buttons every single day of your life. You may as well get used to it. But I want to deactivate those buttons. And the only way to do that is we didn't talk much about this today, but the archaeological journaling aspect of things, and going into the past and going into the trauma and going into the pain and all that stuff that we're talking about is a big part of the process, because you're not going to be able to, because what you wind up with is like anger management.
Yeah, right.
On top of that, now we're going to put a big metal bar over the buttons with a lock on it so nobody can push them.
Right.
Which is build a wall, right? So nobody can get near me, kind of a thing.
Right.
And then we wind up with yet another survival technique or coping mechanism as a result, right. And managing my anger as opposed to getting to the root issues. And you mentioned, the areas of unforgiveness and judgments that are in our hearts. Those are the things that are way down there. And the judgments can be against parents, other people, myself, usually, not to mention all the rejections that have happened to me in my life and my failures, and I haven't let them go. And it just goes on and on and on. And so until you start digging through those things, those wires are connected.
Yeah. So this is kind of what I think we're all explaining to people as counselors. Like, there is a place for behavior modification as a temporary solution, like as a Band-Aid, but it isn't permanent. So sometimes, if let's say we talk about porn, I talk about porn every day. I mean, it's not like there's no shame in it, because it's not an addiction to porn. It's an emotional issue that needs to be healed. So there's something it's connected to, right? So we just have to figure it out. But there's a temporary solution to the porn addiction, which is to find ways to stop, accountability systems to stop with the porn, right? But that's temporary, because there's only so long that you can hold on with both hands with all your might, right? Before you fall off the wagon. So the behavior modification can only be temporary, a temporary solution to doing the root systems work. So it's, as Bill always says, it's a both and situation, right?
Yeah, and you've done that a couple of times today with different facets. It's really important to know that, because we don't want to throw anger management out the window. I mean, if somebody's got a real bad anger problem and they're manifesting in a relationship or a home life with kids or spouses or whatever, we got to do whatever we got to do to get that anger under control, so to speak. But that's the first step in the direction. And if we think, we're just going to solve that by anger management, then we're barking up the wrong tree. We really need to get to the root systems. Much like if you're depressed and you go to a psychiatrist and he gives you medication for depression, that's not the be all and end all. That's a temporary, the way I tell people most of the time, because there are times when people need to be on medication organically because there's a genuine discoverable imbalance in their chemical makeup and so on and so forth. But so many times it's not that, and it's situational depression. And so they take that medication and think that that's going to do it. And then they don't do the work.
Right.
Because they feel better.
Right. And this is a conversation I feel like I have a lot with people. It's like, okay, well, if you are thinking about going on medication, it's only to get you out of the hole so that we can do the work.
Exactly.
Because the medication itself isn't going to heal your problems. It's just going to numb you a little bit.
Essentially, yes. So that's probably one of the big takeaways today. The both and reality is that in this kind of work, we're dealing with this all the time. It might be both and.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, it's both and for me most of the time.
Yep. It looks like we're gonna need a part 2, Kiele.
Listen, Bill, I'll come on anytime. You know me, I can talk for hours. We could talk about this for another 2 hours and it wouldn't get boring. So
I know. I just looked up and it's like, whoa, it's 4 o'clock.
Or 7 o'clock if you're on the East Coast.
7 o'clock on the East Coast. That's right.
Yeah.
Or if you're somewhere in between, it's something else, of course. But well, anyway, thanks for coming on. This was awesome today.
Yeah.
I've got some good viewership going on. Everybody who's watching now, please tell your friends. These will be posted right afterwards on YouTube and on Facebook. And I want to just put a couple of books up today. One of them is called Trauma Bonding. I know it might be hard to see this because of the green screen thing going on.
There it is.
Trauma Bonding. And this is Annalee Alexander. If you can see that. I don't know whether you can see it. It's a yellow book. Annalee Alexander. Another one that I've had for a long time that really helps us to discover the false self and start moving in a direction gently and with self-care and understanding God's love for us and loving every version of ourselves along the way, called Posers, Fakers, and Wannabes by Brennan Manning. One of my favorites. You will love it. And then the shameless plug for The Process, of course.
Yes.
By Bill Hoffman, which really outlines the entire process that we're talking about and more today. And just letting you know, I'm still working on my next book, which hopefully will be out in September.
Wow.
It's going to be a guided devotional and journal that'll be good for a year. It's a companion in doing the process, employing all 3 areas of journaling, which is the classic journaling and the everyday journaling, the archaeological or historical journaling, and then forward journaling, affirmational journaling, and where are we going in the future in this whole process that we're doing, right? Mm-hmm. And everything we talked about today, so we can track our progress as we keep moving. So super excited about that.
Amazing. I was going to say, if people want like a quick, like short training or skills on codependency, I did record, and it hasn't been released yet, so look out for it. I did record a short 20-minute training on codependency for our new site. So whenever that comes out, if that's something that you struggle with, it's like real like how-tos. So like the practical parts of beginning to live a less codependent life.
And you post stuff regularly on Instagram as well, right?
Yeah, I do post pretty regularly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, stories though. I'm a story person.
Okay. But nevertheless, I mean, everything that we're putting out, all of our staff, anything that's going out there is really to help you in the journey, like we've been talking about today. And it is a journey. It's a lifelong journey. And the more arrows we get in the quiver, the better off we're going to be, so that we can, fight the good fight and just keep moving forward. And, sometimes it's going to be 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, and that's okay, because that's part of the journey too, But when you learn to be accountable, you learn to be connected, you learn to be engaged in this process, then you can have victory. All of our failures don't need to be defeats. We're going to have failures. We're going to fall down, but we get up, we don't need to fall headlong out. We don't have to go, oh man, I suck. I'm no good. I'm not going to make it. How long did we all do that, really, one way or the other? So, Christiane, I'm going to give you the last word, and then we're going to.
Oh, I feel so honored to get the last word. I have one thing to say. The process never ends. The minute you start this journey, you're on it forever, and do the work. Because that's how you're going to get the results. The journaling, the reading. It was the best thing that Bill ever gave Mark and I highly, highly suggest it.
Great last word. Do the work.
Yeah, for real.
Do the work. When's it going to be finished? Well, thank you guys so much. This was awesome. And we're going to have, I'll throw it out there now. Nobody really knows, but I'm going to have Vinny and Liz DeMarco next week.
Yay! I love that.
Yeah, it's gonna be really good. Nobody knows who they are, probably, even though I mentioned their names, but they really have a specialized ministry work that really takes. I'm not going to say it takes it to another level, but I think it's just another dimension. And Kiele, you know about this, of what we do here, and really enhances the process. So I advise everybody to come on board next Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern time for that one.
Yes, definitely.
All right. So
thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
that was great. We'll definitely do a part 2.
Okay. See you soon.
See you all. Bye, everybody.